Alright, good evening. I am doing the Project 14 video today. I don't have any of my snowing yet. I'll snow tomorrow. Okay, so history. Being one of the younger members of Project 14, chronologically speaking, I thought I would actually do a bit of history about me. Specifically, I'm going to be, in conjunction with CanCon coming up this weekend, going to be discussing my history in wargaming, because that's going to be a big focus of my channel for the next few days, to say the least, if not longer, depending on how many videos I can wrangle out of it. So at the moment, at the start of the week, I said I was going to paint some incubi. So I've done 2, and I've just got to add the arcs to another one. I'm beyond them at the moment. I don't particularly like the models. They're a pain in the butt to put together. They have not been particularly pleasant to paint. So, to be perfectly honest, I'm just going to blast them out of the way. Get them done as quickly as possible. This guy's just being stubborn, aren't you? That seems to have chipped in my bag. And since I just finished him, I don't really want him to be looking like that yet. So, wargaming. This one will be a longer video because I have quite a history of wargaming. So, it starts before I actually began playing wargaming. I think is probably the best place to start. So, I went to a Catholic primary school, which is I should say, not Catholic. Catholic is the wrong word. Well, I mean, it was. But I went to a private primary school. Thank Christ, that freaked me the hell out for a second there, thinking I'd spilt my frostbite. Okay, so, yeah, I went to a private school for primary. Now, for those who may not be aware of the Australian education system, primary is from years K through 6, and then high school is 7 through 10, and college is 11 and 12. So I attended a Catholic, a Catholic and a private primary school, and a private high school, and a private college. Now, when I finished up in primary school, I lived outside of the standard area that was the zone for my school. I lived a ways further south in terms of availability of other schools and things. So most of the people that I knew and were friends with actually went to a different school, a different high school to me, and I ended up going to a local one for me with some of the friends or some people I knew from primary school. Some of them I was friends with, some of them I didn't know particularly well. And in year 7 we all hung out because we didn't really know anybody else, and they keep thinking, the first year was relatively straightforward, but I began realizing as the year went on that these weren't people that I particularly enjoyed hanging out with. Not because they were bad people, but because their interests and my interests were completely different. I wasn't interested in doing what they were doing, both internally and externally, so I just stopped hanging out with them when I started in year 8. Now this actually left me in a situation where I was a loner. I didn't really have a stable group of friends, but the school I went to had, in my second year of high school, so in year 8, did actually merge with another school, which brought in a huge influx of new students. So I was still a loner and was hanging out pretty much to go to the computer rooms at lunchtime, because you're allowed to go into the computer rooms, and that would be the only time you were actually allowed to play computer games at school. So, being a huge nerd, I took advantage of that. After a while, it became a thing where all the students who were hanging out for the computer labs at lunchtime would actually take up playing handball, which is a child sport, which is commonly played here in Australia. I don't know how popular it is overseas, but it's definitely something that is done by the children of Australia. And I ended up just starting to hang out with some other people who I went to primary school with, who went to a different school to me, and various other people. But then I found a group of people who stopped going to the computer labs at lunchtime. They decided it was more fun to just play handball, and I started just hanging out with them. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know any of them at all. I didn't have any classes with them as far as I was aware, but I just started, sitting around and talking to them and getting to know them all. And then after hanging out with them for a couple of months, I got to know them really well. Got to know them all really well, actually. And a few of them were interested in a game called Warhammer 40,000, which I have discussed briefly in my painting experiences video. If you haven't seen that, it's my first painting time video. Feel free to go back and watch it. But yeah, they were all very interested in playing Warhammer 40,000, which is a space-based game. It's a space-based tabletop miniatures game, which, after hanging out with them for long enough, I decided, you know what, I'm going to join in. These guys seem like a really good group of guys, and you know what, they really are. I'm still friends with just about all of them to this day. The original group I knew when I was in Year 8, I am actually still friends with every single one of them. Just running them. Yeah, I was. Still definitely friends with all of them. So, yeah, I became very good friends with them. Started playing Warhammer with about half of the group played. The other half didn't, but they were very accepting of it and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I began playing Warhammer with a few of them, and then so I started playing Warhammer 40,000. I selected the Blood Angels as my faction. I'm reaching for PVA glue. I'm going to have to get some of the stuff in a minute. So I selected Blood Angels and I began playing them. There wasn't really any particular reason. One of the guys was just like, yeah, you should play Blood Angels. I play them and I think they're great. And I was like, well, they sound, as a guy who literally knew nothing about the hobby when I made the decision to jump into it, I thought Blood Angels sound really cool, So why not? It's a cool name, we'll go with that. And so I did. I jumped into it and started buying a whole bunch of stuff. And then I got moved schools. Now what happened here was, at the end of this year, about a third of the group ended up switching schools. 2 of them went to a different school, and to be honest, I've never heard from them since. I don't know where they are or what they're doing. I've tried to track them both down on Facebook, but that didn't. I haven't been successful in finding them. So yeah, I gave up on that one. And then what else? Yeah, so I moved schools on my own and didn't lose contact with the few friends who I played Warhammer 40,000 with. Yeah, but I still maintained and was collecting Blood Angels and all that sort of stuff. And then what happened was I moved into Warhammer Fantasy, which is as also discussed in the first video, a fantasy-based version of Warhammer. So there was the 2 types which I was doing there. And then one of my... So I basically... There were 3 of us who formed a very close group. We all played Warhammer 40,000, and I and one of the other guys played a lot of Warhammer Fantasy as well. What happened was the fantasy player decided he decided his family ended up needing to move to the very north end of the country. So, for those of you who know Australian geography, I'm in this, I would say, the southeast section. Not all the way in the southeast coast, but I'm definitely, sort of about 3/4 of the way down. And he was moving to the north, the very coast in the north centre. So it's quite a distance to travel. And then we fell out of touch for a long time because he moved around a lot, and we just sort of lost contact with each other. But yeah, what happened was I was playing Warhammer in 40,000, and I made a bunch of friends, most of which I still know, and am very close friends with to this day, and still consider them to be my friends. And then, yeah, the problem which I had with Citadel Miniatures, the company that produces the Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 stuff, is that they would emphasize the fact that they were finding cheaper ways to manufacture their product and were using materials which cost them less money, yet they still found excuses to increase their prices several times a year. And I mean, it didn't bother me in the beginning because there wasn't anybody else selling miniatures. But the hobby was getting to the point where I was no longer prepared to buy things, because if you've never played them before, the new rules would be completely re-released. So the system would be overhauled and re-released once every 4 years. So every 4 years you would have to re-buy the core set, the rule books, everything else, and all that, and everything else that goes along with it. And it got quite expensive, especially if you played both games and tried to, really play both games. I'm not going to say at a competitive level, but at a level where you'd like to be able to play, if you were to sit down with a friend and play whatever you wanted, you would have to have a sizable force. So yeah, it was getting quite expensive for me, and I didn't really like... Actually, well, I should also say, the key reason that I ended up no longer playing... Games Workshop / Citadel Miniatures have produced the greatest game, in my opinion, ever. My favourite game of all time is a game called Mordheim. It is a small band-based game, so you get between 5 and 10, well, maximum of 20 guys, when you fight in cities. So you're supposed to fight on heavily terrained boards with various objectives and things. And the game is super fun. It has an experience system that allows your characters to get better depending on how they do in battle and things that they do. And I loved it. And to this day, it is still my favourite game of all time in terms of tabletop miniature games. And I was there when it was created. I didn't get into it straight away because I had no idea what it was, and I was hesitant to purchase more product. But once I did get into it, as I said, I fell in love with it, and it is still my favourite game to this day. And then after a couple of years, because it was designed to be a way to pull people into the game and then force them into playing their larger games so you spend more money, they stopped supporting it. So there were no more... the models went out of print, meaning that you had to buy an entire box of like 30 to 40 dudes, which did not cover everything that you needed. You would have to buy, the box of guys to get your basics down, and then you'd have to buy extra blisters, which is packets of 1 or 2 guys, to be able to complete the specialists that you needed. And that really frustrated me. And so, and then one of the friends who I made playing Warhammer, and through school at the same time, because what happened was I finished year 10 and my parents realised that I wasn't fitting in at the school, and so they moved me back with all my friends. And I made more friends because my group had grown. And it was brought to my attention by one of the friends that I made moving back to school and through Warhammer that there was a new game that was coming to Australia's shores soon called War Machine. And it was, it took what, at least in my opinion, what Warhammer did and made it less based on mass amounts of dice and made it more about creating balanced armies and presented more tactical options than Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 did. So, and the other thing that got me at the time was that it was cheap. So you could, in order to start playing a game of Warhammer, you really need, well, at the time, I believe it was, at least $150. This, you could buy a starter box for $50, and you're good to go. That's all you needed. You just need the one box, and then you can play games. And you only need extra things if you want to expand your game. So yeah, based on the low entry cost, I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose, we'll give it a go. And you know what? I believe the game to be more balanced, less cheesy, I'm going to say, and a lot more fun, and much better designed for tournament play. Much better, in my opinion. No offense to anybody who enjoys competitive Warhammer, because you know it was a big part. Both competitive Warhammer and Warhammer 40k, they were a big part of my life for my teen years. But I do believe that War Machine is a better game. So I switched into that, and I've been playing it ever since. Their fantasy. The other thing that I really like about War Machine and Hordes is that they released Hordes a few years after I started playing. And Hordes is a game which plays similarly, but also has a very different mechanic for doing things with your army. So, but the two systems are completely compatible. So for example, Games Workshop stuff, you can't take a game of Warhammer 40,000 and incorporate an army from Warhammer Fantasy Battles and have the two armies face off each other on the tabletop. In War Machine and Hordes, however, you can. You can take an army from Hordes and pit it against an army from War Machine and vice versa. But you don't have to either. You know, if you just want to play against Hordes, you can play against just Hordes. So with all these reasons, I decided that it was going to be a good idea for me to jump ship and change over to War Machine. And I came in when, and this, for a lot of people now, I think this might be a bit of a shock, but this was before Epic Warcasters existed. It was before, it was when factions only had the choice of 4 Warcasters. There was no Hordes. There were very limited unit attachments. In fact, I don't think... Oh, there was 1 unit attachment for each faction. And yeah, everything was rather limited because the game was still new and still growing. And so yeah, and then I've been playing ever since. I have my main faction in War Machine is Signar. I have a large Signar force complemented by with a lot of mercenaries. My primary Hordes faction is the Legion of Everblight, which is where these guys come from. And I am not yet to pick up my second Hordes faction yet, purely and simply because I have not had the money. But it is going to be probably Trollbloods. I am currently still debating between Trollbloods and Scorn, but I haven't decided yet, and I don't know. But I think the Trollbloods are cooler, just based on models, because I really like the Trollbloods models. So yeah, I think that might be a decent enough history of my wargaming to make up a passable video. So until next time, enjoy your day.